You all look great. Thanks for coming. So Playboy has a long history with cannabis. In the 60s, when $5 of weed could get you a 50-year life sentence in some states, and others a 99-year sentence, an effective life sentence, Playboy was there to document it. In 1970, Playboy gave the seed money for NORML, which fought against restrictive laws and got people out of jail for ridiculous sentences, and Playboy did features on them. Now we are here in 2019, and cannabis is legal in some states, but people are still going to jail in others. So where do we go from here? Well, let's ask our panelists. So our first panelist is Matt Barnes. Matt Barnes is a former NBA star with a 14-year career in the league and a championship title. He said publicly that he smoked marijuana before all the biggest games. After his mother passed from cancer, Barnes organized his fundraiser, Athletes versus Cancer, that hosts events like Smoke for a Cure with Snoop Dogg. He's been an outspoken advocate for medical cannabis products and partnered with his alma mater, UCLA, to raise funds for a cannabis research initiative. Matt Barnes. Our next panelist is Andrea Drummer. Andrea Drummer is the director of food and beverage at Elevated VIP Cooperative, a company that focuses on cannabis-infused fine dining cuisine. She's appeared on Netflix's Cooking on High, Chelsea Does, and Complex's Complex Conversations. She's also the food editor for Cannabis MD and will be the head chef at West Hollywood's first cannabis restaurant, opening this year. I'll be there. Hope you will be too. Andrea Drummer. Gabriel Guzman is a longtime community activist, co-founder of Latinos for Cannabis, and a proud member of the Equity First Alliance. He's a licensed participant in the Los Angeles Social Equity Program, which aims to help communities hit the hardest by cannabis criminalization. The program gives first dibs on cannabis licenses to social equity applicants, and he promises professional development support. Gabriel's currently developing his own business of high-end cannabis products targeting the Latino consumer. Gabriel Guzman. And our last panelist is Joy Clark. Joy is the founder of Mahogany Mary, a cannabis events company that curates a wide range of experiences, parties, weddings, and brand activations. Plus, Joy is the founder of High Tide Tours, which offers cannabis excursions through Los Angeles. She's been featured in Vice for her thoughts on representation in the cannabis industry. That is your panel. Thank you, everybody, for coming to talk to us.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
So to start it off, icebreaker question. I want to talk about the first time you ever used cannabis and what happened. And if it's embarrassing, extra points. Matt, would you like to start?
Mine was 14, and I think I smoked too much, and it was terrible. But I'm not a quitter, so I tried again, and it worked out.
Right.
So first time was
For the
terrible.
team.
Yeah, first time was terrible.
My first time was so terrible that it led me down the wrong path. My first time was 14. I tried it. It went completely awry. I ended up in court, almost went to juvenile hall, and began a career as a drug counselor.
We're going to come back to that.
I'm reformed.
You're
Welcome
reformed
back.
from the reform.
Welcome back.
Gabriel.
For me, I would say my first experience was a pleasant and good experience, as a matter of fact. I think I was quite surprised. No, honestly, I was quite surprised. I was under the impression that I was gonna lose my mind and run in the alley crazy, yelling stuff. And I was really enlightened. I felt like it was.
You thought if you smoked, you were going to run in an alley?
Yeah, I thought if I
Take your
smoked,
shirt
I was
off?
gonna go crazy. But it was actually a really enlightening experience for me. It really helped me to just kind of focus on the now as opposed to stressing out on things. And so it was really important for me at that particular period in time in my life.
Joy?
Yeah. I also had a good first experience beyond that. I was babysitting my sister's first kid.
Does she know that?
Oh, yeah, she still talks about it to this day. But I was about 17. My cousin and I were just in the backyard, and she, rolled the lousiest blunt ever. But it was still a great experience, and I took a great nap. The child is still safe. He's 14 now, so he's good.
He made it. So this event, this is Playboy. Obviously, pleasure is a big part of Playboy, and cannabis can be a part of pleasure for people. What does that mean to you? How do you like to use cannabis? What's your favorite way?
Joints. I smoke blunts for almost 20 years, and I smoked while I played, so I never realized how heavy blunts were until one time I started messing with Wiz probably like 5 years ago, and he's like, you need to try. He was trying to make me and Snoop switch to papers. I tried.
So you smoked with Wiz Khalifa and
Yeah,
Snoop Dogg.
yeah.
You're here, so you made it.
I
through.
made it. I made it.
Right.
But anyway, I started smoking papers and realized, like, when I started running in my games, I felt a lot lighter, and I haven't touched a blunt since. So I'm all joints.
Okay. Do you roll them yourself?
Yeah, but I get them pre-rolled too sent to me, but I can't roll them either way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Andrea?
I started with edibles, clearly, so that was my kind of go-to. But I've built up a tolerance, so Lowell pre-rolls is like my fun time. That's a good time.
For you though, you don't really like brownies though. You're into like savory.
No, I'm a savory chef, so I don't do many. When I first started in the industry, it was all savory. I was inspired by the smell of Blue Dream butter, and created some bruschetta. Now that was a fun time. I think I ate like 7 pieces, and here I am.
I would have. That's amazing. I'd just lay down if I did that.
I created a whole business out of that one night.
Exactly. Gabriel, how about you?
For me, I'm a big fan of the flower, curated flower. And once I discovered concentrates and just the medicinal properties and the benefits of removing the plant material, dry plant material, I became a big fan of concentrates. But I do enjoy smoking a joint. I think there's a huge connectivity component to that. I think that's what connects a lot of people is, sharing a joint together. And you can share within a group of folks that you probably normally wouldn't be associating or hanging out with outside of cannabis. And so, I like to honor that tradition of smoking a good joint with some good family and friends. Socially, yeah. But again, I definitely partake more of concentrates than I do flower. So.
How about you, Joy?
I like to dab.
Flower has my heart. I think just the ritual of rolling up, having my tea, listening to some Janae Aiko is just the vibe. Especially after a long day, being an entrepreneur, you have that just the ritual of just sitting down and breaking it up and rolling it and having the tea. So yeah, that's my most pleasurable moments when it comes to it.
That's right.
So this question is mostly for Joy, but everybody is open to it. We got to talk about sex. Do you feel like cannabis, because a lot of people talk about using alcohol to enhance sex, do you feel like cannabis can help people improve their sex life?
Oh, for sure. I think for men and women. For myself, and I speak for other women, we know that we always have a lot of things going on in our head, whether you're a mother, entrepreneur, a businesswoman. So for me, smoking before sex relaxes my mind. It helps me to be more present with myself and more present with my partner, and it just makes sex magical. Sometimes,
Magical sex.
Magical.
Hashtag magical sex.
Hashtag magical. So using it as an enhancer, and for me, it's intimacy between myself and my partner. Like, I love that my boyfriend smokes weed. So like us being able to talk at the end of the day, him rolling up for me is like foreplay. Like, oh, you rolling me some weed? Oh, this weed? It makes me feel great.
So much.
Exactly. So yeah, I think it can enhance, and we know there's cannabis lubes, there's teas, there are other ways to ingest beyond just smoking flower. So you can use cannabis lubes, you can use cannabis candles for massages. So there's a lot of different ways that you can incorporate it into your love life and sex life.
Do you feel like it's a different experience than just using alcohol?
For sure, because even if one person, if you're having drunk sex and you both not drunk, it's not fun. It's not fun. So if I smoke and my boyfriend doesn't smoke this, I'm still gonna have a great time. He's still gonna have a great time. So I think having drunk sex can sometimes be singular.
I think too, it's because I always smoke, and my girlfriend doesn't, and I got her to smoke like 2 weeks ago, just 2 hits, and we ended up having sex, and she really enjoyed it. And I always try to say, like, excuse me, but your orgasms are more. I feel like my orgasms
You can
are
say
strong. Oh, that's
It's
right.
Playboy. It's Playboy.
Get out.
Like, the orgasms are just more explosive, and that was the thing she told me the next morning. She's like, I'm trying to explosive. I was like, I'm trying to tell you, what I mean?
Explosive.
I think too,
and
and like, to kind of pick up what Joy said. I mean, that the level you connect on when your partner is smoking with you is just different than connecting on alcohol or connecting on anything else. Like you said, when you're both on that same page, and together between my girl and I got 3 sons, and she has 3 kids, so she's a mom of 6. So at the end of the day, I'm like, you need something. So I'm trying to convince her at least to start with CBD. She won't go all the way in with the weed with me yet, but I'm trying to start her on some CBD just to kind of let her know, like, there's so many components to this plant that can help people. So it's not just, I think people are afraid of the stigma of being high, but there's so many more, attributes to the plant. So I'm just trying to educate her on it. But
You're trying to do her a favor.
2 weeks ago, it really helped. So we'll see how it goes.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Well, I think it definitely heightens the intimacy. I think, again, back to, cannabis really enabling 2 partners to be able to connect on more of an intimate level is definitely important. It definitely reduces anxiety. I know for a lot of couples, the very first time that they meet, there's an anxiety component. Most people just go for heavy drinks and then end up doing things that they regret. Unlike alcohol, cannabis, you actually enjoy it and actually have a real intimate experience and really get an opportunity to really communicate with your partner. As far as, me personally, I think that it makes me a great lover. It allows me to really be more creative when it comes to my level of foreplay. I think that the more confident you are in just your level of, intimacy and foreplay that you bring to the table, it's key. And I think that the other person being able to let go is really useful. And so, I think cannabis is really helpful in that.
It's a must.
Regards.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that. I think it definitely heightens the experience. It makes it more intense. But I also think that it's important to talk about the stigma because for me, the first time that I had sex, you having consumed cannabis, it was so intense that there was some guilt associated with it, right? Coming from a very religious background. So it was something that I had to process. But I think that it's an opportunity, one, for to reduce like sexual repression, and also for a great business opportunity if anybody want to get on that.
Do you think that that's guilt about sex or guilt about cannabis specifically, or a
Both.
mix of both? Okay.
Both. And so
Taboo.
Yeah, it's very taboo. It was again, coming from a Southern Baptist background, sex is not necessarily supposed to be pleasurable. And then I know, it's so sad, but here I am.
Well, it enables you to actually have that freedom of expression as well.
Exactly.
When you think about the history associated with cannabis, I
Yeah.
mean, the whole hippie movement was about love and cannabis, and really being able to connect on that level. And so,
It's taboo.
and that was taboo at that time. And so, I'm just really excited to see this conversation is actually taking place. And
Me too.
yeah.
And pleasure as a whole being taboo. So whatever it is, like being able to enjoy
Sex and
sex
cannabis?
and cannabis, like all of those things are taboo. And I personally think that sex, weed, and food should be the most pleasurable things of your life.
Check.
Well, we're in LA, as we all know. I hope everybody knows we're in LA. And so we can have this conversation. We can talk about sex and cannabis. There are many parts of the country where there is going to be a huge stigma where you would not even have this conversation publicly. So what do we need to do to change that?
I think just continue to educate people. I think that's the key. Like I mentioned last time I spoke, there's such a stigma with being high. And I think, people are afraid of that. It's the propaganda that's pounded into us, as children. You high, and she was talking about backstage, you're going to start doing crack and do this and do that. And it's just, but I mean, they just really try to scare you. You know what I mean? So I think the more we can educate people and let them understand the difference between CBD and THC and all the other cannabinoids, I think that's the only way we're going to be able to continue to move this conversation along. And then it takes things like what I was fortunate enough to do with team up with my alma mater, UCLA, and conduct this UCLA cannabis research program. So, because I can tell my experience until I'm blue in the face, but until there's medical research backing up what I'm saying and really educating people, the conversation doesn't move. So now that everyone is, really getting into it on an educational level, it's starting to go.
Yeah, I think the image of the modern cannabis consumer has changed, and I think that it's really up to us as modern day consumers to really go out there and advocate not only on the medicinal properties of cannabis, but the social and economic benefits that it brings. And so I think it's important to carry on the conversation, be pioneers and have these open, candid conversations that cannabis is nothing that we should be afraid of. And it takes us being involved, because being a connoisseur is not enough. You know, if you really want to see generational changes, you know, it's important that we actually go out there and have these conversations with our family and friends, and come at it from an educated perspective. You know, because there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that exists out there, and it's up to us to actually go and challenge that and change the narrative. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I always say it's not just us that are the advocates, it's the people here that are the advocates as well. And it's the different faces, it's the diversity, it's, you know, you talking to your group of people, me talking to my family who are still very much in the church and who are now coming over to the other side of at least CBD use, like your girlfriend. So, and we're all in different spaces, us all, even though we're in the industry. I rarely see them. So good to see Gabriel. We kind of started many years ago. In the industry. So it takes all of us. We're all a part of this conversation and to move the needle.
I agree. I think, like you said, going back to where a lot of people in LA are transplants. So sometimes it's easy, like, I'm just in the Disney world of weed and not forgetting that in Illinois, in Chicago, where I'm from, though they're having some great changes, I need to go back and educate and, like, really talk about it to make it normal. So that's what I had to do with my family. Like, I talk about my consumption, I talk about my businesses to continue to beat it in my parents' head and my family's head, like, this is real and this is what I do and what I'm about. And then other, like, professional athletes coming out and saying that I use the plant, business women and businessmen coming out and changing that perception of what that lazy stoner is.
Right. Mothers.
Yeah.
And it's great to see that there's purpose-driven lives that are being built out of this. You know, when people start to see that, you know, they start to see why you're so passionate behind cannabis, and when you come at it from, like I said, an educated standpoint and why you're so passionate about it, people are moved by that. And when you start to impact people's life on a personal level, and you see the lives that are being changed, you know, as a result of it, it's almost like you're indebted to be in service of these people.
When women are still being, or not women, but humans are still being locked up for CBD, we have to be inflamed and passionate about that. We have to get busy. We have to continue the work.
And I did say we were going to come back to this.
Go.
So, you know, that's the position you have now, but there was a time when you did not like marijuana at all. So how do you go from that to a quote-unquote cannabis chef?
You know, in part, it was the education component. For me, it's, you know, I grew up in South Florida, like right in the Bible Belt. My family is from Georgia. I moved to Philadelphia, took all of my wayward beliefs there, and on with me, they went to New York, where I judged my friends who smoked. Of course, in my experience, and here's the thing, I believe that my experience, my first time experience with cannabis, was it was inappropriate, you know, because one, it was completely illegal in Florida, so you didn't have the freedom to grow. And so who knows what I was ingesting, you know? So it wasn't an educated and informed decision on my part. And then the person, of course, was older than me, and, you know, he's giving me this plant. He probably doesn't know what he was smoking. And so coming from New York to LA and seeing bud being freely grown in dispensaries and they're in the windows, of course, I was like, these crazy Californians, like, what is that? They're all gonna end up on heroin, you know? But I had to open my mind, and in part it was working for an attorney who was an advocate and consumer. And I would have these really intense conversations with this guy, and I would walk away going, but he's high. You know, so I really
still functioning,
right,
have an intelligent
exactly. And so I had to educate myself, and then I would have conversations with him about it, and really got to understand that I was a part of the problem in touting that propaganda that just say no and cannabis is the gateway drug. So it wasn't a tough transition once I got amongst the right people.
Okay. And a part of the perception of cannabis, whether we like it or not, is law, what is legal and what is not. And in the federal government right now, there's bills in the House and Senate to possibly deschedule marijuana. So marijuana is a Schedule I drug. So that is with heroin and a lot of other nastier things. But we don't know if it's going to pass, for one. Is it time to really be having the national conversation about national legalization, or is it more important to focus on grassroots efforts, local communities, states right now?
I think it's everything. I believe everyone has a role in this. And whether it's on a grassroots level or on a national level, the conversation has to happen simultaneously for us to make strides. When I first started in this industry, a lot of people said, I cannot possibly be here now from where I began. And I had to educate people while the process was happening, while advocates were talking the talk, and I had to do my part. So it's all encompassing. We can't stop out of fear. This is not a fear-based industry by any stretch.
Yeah, it's definitely one and the same. The narrative is definitely changing. I think that now that cannabis is starting to become more mainstream, people are more aware, they're more enlightened as to, the negative stigma that's been associated with it, the propaganda that's, been built behind it. And so, I think it is important now more than ever, like I said earlier, especially if you're a cannabis connoisseur, making sure to educate people on why you decide to choose cannabis as your alternative recreational drug. I hate calling it a drug, or if whether you're going to use it for medicinal reasons, but it's also, carrying that with you everywhere you go. Like people say, some Christians that go and preach 2 by 2. Well, if you have a friend that's a cannabis connoisseur, when you're out there and you're enjoying cannabis and you're talking to people, share your personal story. Help them understand how you came to cannabis and why you're so passionate behind it. And when you look at the social justice component and how there's been so many people affected by the war on drugs, including people of color, it's something that we are responsible and enlisted to do, is to really go out there and talk about these things. And
it also goes back to education. Marijuana, cannabis was not always illegal. Like, you were able to purchase cannabis from your Sears catalog. And when it became illegal, it was because Black and brown people had access to it. So understanding, again, going back to the roots, why is it illegal? Because Black and brown people had access to it, and the racist war on drugs was against us. While we were the pioneers, we were making tinctures and growing our own and healing our communities through plant medicine, because that's what cannabis is. It's not a drug, it's a plant. So even thinking about wrapping your mind around that we're making a plant that grows worldwide. Illegal, something that grows out the ground. We're not mixing anything with it. We're not chopping it up. It grows out the ground like this. So how is that illegal?
Even from like a perspective from a person, an operator, or somebody who's been in the business for quite some time, pioneers per se, we've always been given that image of being felons, of criminals, because we decided to partake in this industry. And now, it's quite ironic that a lot of these people are moving into the cannabis space who 5-10 years ago probably never even set foot in the space because they were too concerned about facing criminal charges. And yet, we are the ones that have carried this industry on our back. We've been the ones that have taken that risk to want to go and build these brands. And yet, there isn't this discussion on the federal legalization of cannabis. I mean, it's just, again, the social justice component is something that isn't talked about.
I think, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm
got
done.
it. Mm-hmm. I think it's why it's so important and why I try to use my platform the way I do. Being able to play at the highest level for 15 years, to be able to win a championship, knowing that, professional sports will pump you full of anything to get you back on that court or field, whether it's, opioids, the shots. They don't care if you drink alcohol, but, smoke a joint and you're going to get fined and you're going to get suspended and you're going to do all these things. So, I think, like I said, under the, the right eye, obviously if you're not, educated on it, but it's definitely an amazing alternative. Like I said, I smoked throughout my whole college career, UCLA, whole NBA career, and I got caught a couple times, but to me, it just wasn't, it's still what I was going to do, so I just had to, find the loopholes because, any kind of opioid would, turn my stomach. I'm not I can socially drink, but I'm not really a drinker either, so it's just, I knew before and after the game I can go to it and it would be there, and I knew how it made me feel. And then, like I said before, the fact that there's education now backing up. I knew how it made me feel a long time ago, but now the fact that UCLA or Harvard are saying this is what cannabis can do for you and does for you, it kind of justifies it. So, to touch back, that's why I really just go hard as an athlete because, we're at it's supposed to be the worst thing for you, but some of the, your kids' favorite athletes, some of your guys' favorite athletes in here are consumers, and they shouldn't be looked at it negatively. They shouldn't lose endorsements. They shouldn't lose money for partaking in it.
That's right.
Yeah, and kids look up to athletes, but lots of adults do too. And do you think that if the NBA or the NFL changed their bans, or they have different rules, but change their regulations, that would make a difference in how people perceive
I
cannabis?
think it'd be huge, you know, and I think we're on the way. I think CBD is going to make its way in professional sports first. I know there's definitely talks, but what I like is, you know, I work closely with the NBA still and the Players Association. They each have their doctors on it, studying it so they can understand it. And that's why I'm so adamant about the program I'm doing at UCLA, is because, you know, we're studying the plant from head to toe, but I want to be able to have, you know, some of these bigger athletes be able to say, like, hey, you know, I do use and I responsibly use, and this is why I use. You know what I mean? To let people know that it's not everything that you grew up being taught it was.
And do you see medical cannabis being a big part of the legal cannabis industry in the future?
I think at the end of the day, it should all be just legal, period, whether it's medical or not. You know what I mean? You have to be responsible just like anything else. You know, we all had our bad stories or our first times where we took too much, you know, just like the same thing where I've drank too much. You know what I mean? So I think anything, you know, regulated and handled responsibly, especially something like this that's so beneficial on so many different levels, should really have a serious look at. And I think it should be just as acceptable for a mom that's having a glass of wine at the end of the day to smoke a joint. You know, why not? You know, so it's come a long way. I still think we have a long way to go, but we're definitely pointing in the right direction. And like you said, the social justice side of it, and then the economical side of, you know, each city or each state that legalizes, you see the growth and the revenue it generates. It's only a matter of time.
Well, speaking of the business side, where do you see legal cannabis going in the next 5 years or so? What are you really excited about seeing?
Shoot, it all. I mean, just to think like 5 years ago, where we've come from then till now. I think it's anything that you can do outside of the cannabis industry, you can bring it under the umbrella of cannabis and dive in. So the opportunity is just limitless, I believe. I started out as a chef, and now I'm a cannabis chef. And who would have thought that would be my path? I see cannabis CPAs, cannabis attorneys, cannabis, you know, like anything that you can do. I think in just the hospitality industry alone, there are cannabis hotels or cannabis retreats. I intend to have cannabis bed and breakfasts. We're doing on-site consumption now, so I think it's limited. It's really just about using our imagination and wanting to dive in and be in the space.
Exactly. And I think that, piggyback on what Andrea said, what you're currently doing in any realm of industries, you can bring that to cannabis. So my background is in media, experiential marketing, so I built businesses that's just doing those same things, but marrying that with my love of the plant. And when it comes to talking about social equity, you know, a lot of times we're pushing retail licenses and deliveries. There's so many other things that you can do. If you're an accountant that loves the plant, be an accountant for cannabis industry, for cannabis businesses. Other entrepreneurs is gonna need that. If you're a health and wellness person that smokes cannabis, you need to talk about that with your consumers. You have to be educated to pass that along. And then other changes in the industry, I think right now we see a lot of big businesses coming into cannabis. We see a lot of liquor brands and cigarette brands and big pharma. And right now I think that boom is gonna stop. Because the real consumers of cannabis are grassroots. We want that community. People are going to know what your brand ethos is. They want to know where your products came from, if it's green. So though we're seeing a big boom, I really know and feel that it's going to go back to the small brands and small batch and going back to that community feel of, because that's the roots of cannabis. Like we had an industry before this new regulated industry. So I think that's going to be one of the main things. Like right now we're going to see a big uptick and big brands coming in to it, but I really think that the consumers that really love the plant are going to shun those brands. So that's what I hope.
We're going to have artisanal cannabis.
Exactly. We will.
I think we're at a very unique period of time right now where we're actually able to document the end of prohibition, you know, and great brands are going to be built as a result of it, you know, and like my colleagues were saying, you know, it's a real economic opportunity for people to participate, to create real generational wealth. And I think one of the common misconceptions that people have coming into this space is, I don't know how to grow, or I've never ran a retail location, or I don't know how to deliver, I don't know how to even smoke cannabis. Well, like they were saying, there's so many different ancillary services that you can, bring to the cannabis space. If you're a business that is struggling and you're having a hard time scaling, why not, think about targeting the cannabis space? Again, that's just another economic opportunity for you to create generational wealth for your family. But it's a real important time. I think, again, if you think about when the internet, back in Silicon Valley, if there had been opportunities for people of color to participate in an industry that is now huge, there'd be a lot of millionaires that were brown and black, but...
Well, speaking of the economic opportunity, so don't let this panel fool you. Legal cannabis industry is very, very white. It's very white. So going forward into the future, and I know you're involved with the equity program, how do we fix that? How do we make sure that everybody, especially the people who are the most impacted by the war on drugs, get to go forward and get some of this money?
Well, for those that aren't familiar, the recreational or legalization of cannabis brought a lot of opportunities, particularly with Proposition 64 and Measure M in Los Angeles. There's 4 cities that have adopted a social equity program in the state of California. San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, and Los Angeles. Los Angeles being the largest city and the most diverse and the most complicated. The social equity program has been created for people of color to be able to participate. In theory, it sounds good, but there is a lot of contextualization that needs to be done with that particular program. And it requires the city of Los Angeles to do its part in properly funding these programs. Because it's great that there's conversations being had surrounding social equity, but if these programs aren't being properly funded, then all it is rhetoric. But it's up to us, people who have been carrying the burden on our back. Like she said, we've been the ones that have created this industry before it was even an industry to be able to participate in. It's up to us to be able to go out there and demand that we become stakeholders and hold the city accountable and understand that the work isn't done. Nobody's going to come and give us reparations. We got to go out and demand participation.
Exactly.
All facts.
And it goes back to just like education, because a lot of like my family members are afraid of the plant because of the war on drugs, because I still have cousins and family members in jail. Like
The consequences.
That's beat into our head on top of Christianity. So it's really like unbrainwashing everyone and understanding that we can't shun this away. There's cities in Los Angeles that are predominantly black and said no to cannabis, said no to recreational or adult use, and that's going to bring funding. So making sure that it's more than like social equity. Some like people think it seems like a handout. No, it needs to be social responsibility. So besides just giving us the opportunity to get a license, what incubators are we building? So not only can we need to have a successful business. We need to make sure that we're bringing people into the industry that they can have a successful business. And right now, it's not. A lot of it is rhetoric. We need programs, we need business courses, we need, everything it takes even to build the application. You need support along the way to make sure that we have businesses that are going to be successful and not just handing out licenses to say that we did it.
Yeah, there was big conversation surrounding that, when Measure M in Los Angeles was first being proposed, and that's why the constituents voted for it, because there was that social equity component. But again, it's up to us to really hold the city accountable to continue that conversation. And that's why organizations like ours, Latinos for Cannabis, Equity First Los Angeles, and all the other organizations that have come together to really push for that conversation, push for that actual funding. Because without the funding, it's pointless. We will have a failed program.
Exactly.
I think that's what they're doing really, is just checking boxes by handing these out, banking on, say you're just, you're fresh out. We're going to give you a license, but you have no business background. Who's going to rent you a retail space? And then you tell them, I'm going to sell cannabis. Oh, you were just in jail. You're not going to sell that in my building. So they're banking on us not being able to have the follow through once they do hand the licenses out.
Yep.
And then, the big white companies come in and sweep everyone underneath the rug, and it's unfortunate because we've lost not only, lives and prison time and all this kind of stuff that, our family members or friends have suffered from it, yet we're not really, it's supposed to, we don't really have a voice in the space yet, so to speak, in the big scheme of things. So like I said, it's a continued conversation. A former teammate of mine, Al Harrington, has launched a brand called Viola as well, and we're working on a social equity fund right now, a pretty large one actually. So we're hoping that we'll be able to get that funding. No timetable, but hopefully by the end of the year so that we can, kind of be the standard where you can come to us, get your loan. We're going to see you all the way through. We're going to put you in courses so you'll be able to succeed, so you'll be able to run a successful business.
And another thing I wanted to mention too is a lot of people aren't having this particular conversation, but with those economic opportunities, you have to remember that there's capitalists that are looking to move into our market, into our communities. And there's a lot of predatory practices that are happening as a result of these opportunities. And so part of us as an organization or as advocates or as a license holder, we need to have these conversations to say, hey, there's people that are moving into our community with predatory intentions that want to partner up with a social equity applicant that don't intend on helping their business succeed, merely to snatch a license and become successful themselves. And so thank you for covering that. I think it is important that people understand that there is access to funding, but we do have to approach it very carefully.
So I want to give a couple minutes for people to ask questions. We're running out of time a little bit here. Does anybody have a question for the panel? We have some runners with microphones here.
Don't be shy. Don't be high.
Hey guys, thank you for being here. Appreciate what you guys are saying. I'm Eugenio with Cannabis Now magazine, and big fan of Playboy, by the way. Just want to ask you guys from a California perspective. It seems like California has really taken the leadership role in the cannabis space, and especially here in LA, it's become a bit of the epicenter for change. So, there's still a huge community of people that are not walking into dispensaries, they're not ordering cannabis online, they're not even consuming cannabis media. And Playboy being one of the most recognized brands in the space, how can we bridge that gap between the mainstream greater population not engaging in this new opportunity for health and wellness, and still feeling like there's still major just real barriers to entry to learn and to even be aware of events like this in the space? So how do we still, we talk a lot about the industry, but how do we still reach those people who aren't even aware or feel comfortable even engaging?
I think we have to open our mouths. We have to talk. We have to, like I said, that's why I work so hard. I can kind of be the shield for professional athletes now, because they can't comfortably speak on it without losing an endorsement or being suspended, or getting in trouble. So it's just conversations that had to be had. It's the education that has to be had. You know what I mean? We all have, but everyone has a platform now. Everyone has their phone now. So, just documenting stuff like this. Hey, I'm heading to the Playboy Cannabis panel. You know what I mean? It's really just continuing to get the word out, so it's not a scary conversation to have, because some people are scared, like you said, to even have the conversation. So I think the more we speak on it, the more we educate on it, the more doors open, the more people be susceptible to at least listening.
Yeah, I think it's important also to engage spaces that aren't so cannabis driven. Like Playboy doing this is phenomenal. I'm the food editor for Cannabis MD, and though it's Cannabis MD, our reach is that demographic that you speak of. It's not preaching to the choir. It's talking to the mothers. It's talking to the faith-based constituents. It's talking to people that were like myself, who was completely against cannabis. So it's just really getting into these mainstream spaces and getting back to, the mademoiselles and, in these places and having the conversation.
I think in the age of social media, I think it's important to be able to work with influencers, to be able to push that message. I think that now, like I said, we're in a real unique opportunity to where we can start to hold big corporations responsible for having some sort of a corporate responsibility to give back to the community, and work with brands like Playboy, who really intend on seeing things change for the long term, not only the recreational use, but also the social justice component. And so I think it's important to have these conversations with people that are influencers, to partner up with them and to continue to push that message.
Oh, and P.S. Cannabis MD has a billboard now in Times Square. So that in itself is pretty huge.
If we could squeeze in one more question.
Hello, my name is Ms. Kindness, and thank you all for being here and doing this. And what you just said, Matt, about what you're doing with UCLA and your new business, I'm very excited about that, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
I am a mother and professional educator in this space, and I get questions a lot about cannabis and parenting. So I'm interested to know more about how you think we can talk with our children about cannabis and what kinds of things we can do professionally to make the community feel more safe with it coming into their communities around their kids.
I think thank you for bringing that up. It's an important conversation that we should have, especially when it comes to us changing the perception associated with cannabis. I think that these particular programs like Measure M or Proposition 64, they have certain components that are there to fund certain programs that are aimed at educating the community, preventing, harm reduction associated with cannabis. And so I'm actually a parent as well. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and being in the industry as long as I have, I've always made it a point to educate my daughter first and foremost. I was very adamant on allowing my daughter to even see the consumption that or our consumption of cannabis. And I think as a parent, you always want to be able to protect and shield your child from that. But it's either you educating them or somebody else does. And I think that's where it starts out. It starts out at home. It starts out having these conversations, because kids are having conversations about, Adderall and going into their parents', prescription locker or medicine cabinet, and they're actually getting high off of prescription, medication, but nobody's having these conversations. And so it's important that those conversations start at home. Us as the example, we have to lead by example in the choices that we make as parents. Another thing that is a concern for us connoisseurs as well is, having to fear Child Protective Services. And I think that as advocates, we should be really pushing that conversation to say, hey, we're not criminals if we decide to use a recreational alternative to alcohol or, to prescription pills. And so, I think it's important that we have that conversation at home first and foremost.
Yeah, I think to piggyback it is huge what he said. I have twin boys that are 10 now, but at 8, I put them to bed and they looked through the back window and saw me smoking. So they came downstairs the next morning and said, Dad, you shouldn't smoke cigarettes, especially if you're an athlete. And I'm like, well, I'm not, Daddy's not smoking cigarettes. So right there, I'm just like, okay, it just got real. You know what I mean? I don't want to lie to them. You know what I mean? So I explained. I was just like, how Daddy's getting kind of old and my ankles. I just kind of broke it. I think they're 8, and they're in my locker room and they watch me play and everything. This is while I was still playing. So how Daddy's knees and back hurt sometimes and ankles hurt. Daddy doesn't like to take pills or drink alcohol, so when I smoke a joint, it helps me sleep, it helps my body feel better, and I can relax. And then one of my twin sons is like, well, my ankles hurt. When can I smoke? So then, I told him not till he gets old. He's like, okay, so when I'm 30, I can smoke. But, to piggyback off what he said, I think it's...
I think 30's old.
30's old. To piggyback off what he said, I mean, the way that we're in an interactive world now with social media and my kids watch YouTube 24/7, I would rather teach my kids than have their friends or someone online teaching them. So it definitely starts at home. I mean, I thought 8 was young, but looking back on it, like I said, I'd rather have we haven't talked about it since. It's not something I do in front of them. They're 10 now, but it's a conversation that has to be had, just like sex and just like other things. And it's the world we live in now. Most likely, if you're not a naive parent, your child is going to try something along the way. So like I said, I'd rather have him educated and know the effects from it and my thoughts on it before we get there, and to be able to keep that open line of communication. You know what I mean? Like, too often I think kids run and hide or are very secretive or sneaky. Like, no, the first time they're gonna smoke, they're gonna smoke with me, and I'm gonna get them super high, and hopefully it'll, buy me a couple more years. But like I said, I wanted to give them everything, my point of view, because I've been fortunate enough to kind of been there and done all of it.
Yeah. So on that note, we are out of time. That kids will be super happy. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody who came here to talk to us about this. It's been a great conversation. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.